afternoon. My name is Rob Cowie. I'm with the Portland Public Schools Community Involvement and Public Affairs Department, and I want to welcome you to our live stream discussion of high school system design implementation report and a discussion about next steps to accelerate the school district's progress in improving graduation rates, closing the achievement gap, and delivering more equitable program to all students. 2 years ago, the Portland School Board approved a series of reforms designed to improve the performance of Portland high schools. At the time, Portland Public Schools established 22 metrics to evaluate the effectiveness of these reforms. This week, the Portland School Board received a report that updated the board and the community on Portland Public Schools' progress toward a better and more effective high school system. With us today are Trip Goodall, Portland Public Schools High School Director, Karina Wolf, Education Options Director, and Andrew Dyke from the research firm EcoNorthwest, and they're going to talk with us about the findings in the report. And we'll also be discussing questions we've received over the past couple of weeks through email about high schools and our high school system report. If you have a question and you're watching at home right now, you can email us at highschools@pps.net, and we'll be happy to discuss your question. So we'll walk through a presentation that the school board received earlier this week and then get into the questions. Jumping back 2 years ago, why did Portland Public Schools begin a process to redesign high schools? At the time, the Portland Public Schools had a 53% graduation rate. District-wide, we had in our schools pockets of excellence, things that were working well in high schools, but in other locations, wide disparity, both in achievement and in enrollment that created substantial inequities in programs across the district. We had places where students who lived across the street from each other were going to schools that offered dramatically different and disparate educational opportunities, and also in schools that delivered dramatically disparate educational outcomes as well. So that launched a process in which Superintendent Carol Smith created a high school action team to develop a set of recommendations, which ultimately took the form of a plan to reform Portland's high schools that was presented to the school board, revised through community feedback, and ultimately approved in October of 2010. And Trip and Karina will go through a presentation of what has changed in Portland's high schools since then and what are the results that we're seeing.
Great. Thank you. Well, again, I want to welcome everybody to today's webinar. This is a presentation that we did on Monday for the school board and the community. A series of slides that give somewhat of the highlights, if you will, of a document that is currently online. If you're interested in reading it in its totality. The first thing I just want to remind people again, if you look at the dates here, February through June of 2008, these were the immediate priorities that the superintendent and the board put in front of the public and our district at that time. So making K-8s work, and again, our high school strategy, develop district-wide strategies around our high schools, and accelerating achievement was the ultimate goal. So when we look at the high school system design goals, we're really looking at 5 key areas: improving graduation rates, making sure that students are on track to graduate by 10th grade, college readiness, high school readiness, and enrollment parity, community schools that are in demand. This document is really a status report. We've been in implementation for a year now, and so it was an opportunity for us to go back, take a look at the expectations that we put in front of the public 2 years ago, and to see whether or not we were meeting those expectations. So the document has a report card that in essence has a number of metrics that measure graduation rate, narrowing the graduation gap, enrollment parity, and core program. There is significantly more in this document, but those are the key metrics that we're going to be examining here today.
And if I could just add, the cohort that we're discussing is the 2007 cohort. So again, we have a lot of conversations about current practice, and what we're really looking at is the cohort between 2007 and 2011.
Hey, Karina, could you explain a little bit more about what a cohort is and how the four-year graduation rate is measured, and is that the only graduation rate that's measured?
Thanks, Rob. So a cohort rate is, we wanted to take a look and really look at our data and compare like apples to apples. And so of the students that started as freshmen in 2007, how many graduated as seniors in June of 2011? And so that is our four-year cohort graduation rate. It is not the only graduation rate. We often look to, particularly when we look at alternative programs, to a fifth-year graduation rate or continued learning and other, how do we get post-secondary ready, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But for the purposes of this study and for the purposes of our milestones, we often refer to a four-year graduation rate. And so this cohort gave us a window into what does that look like. Let's take one data set and see how we do.
And if you don't mind, just one more follow-up question. So in the past, graduation rates here in Portland may have been reported as 80%,
right.
75%. How is that rate that we've seen historically different from the 53% rate that the district started from when high school system design was launched to our 62% rate right now?
So one of the things that happened in that rate is that what we would do is we would look at the number of students who started as freshmen now in this study, the same students, following them through by name, every student by name through 2011. Previously, when we looked at rates that were higher, one of the things we did was look at who started individual years, like for instance, who started their senior year of the class of, and how many people finished that year. And so our rates were at a much higher rate. We did not take always into account in the data students that we lost between their freshman year and their senior year.
Great, thank you for clarifying that.
You bet. Okay.
Next slide. So if we're looking at graduation rates, oh, yes, one more. Thank you. If we're looking at graduation rates based on the 2008-9 baseline year, there was 43% who were graduating in 4 years. Our target was to have a 10-point increase, and that was a target that was set for 2014 and 15. Our current data as of last year, 2010-11, the cohort that Karina just mentioned, was 62%, which was a 9-point gain. And as always, we're breaking this down by ethnicity as we move forward, but the overall gain was a 9-point gain. Another metric that we use is on track to graduate, which is a way of taking a look at how our students are accruing credit into their 10th grade year. So the baseline data, again, from 2008-09, 51% of students were on track to graduate. The target was a 10-point increase. Our current data as of 2010-11 is 62%. So we have an 11-point gain, exceeding our target that we established for 2014-15. Another area that another expectation behind high school system design was enrollment parity. And so previously, we had a disparity from our largest schools to our smallest schools of 1,200 students. Our current disparity is 710 students. The goal is an enrollment disparity of below 375 students between our largest and smallest schools. So we're on track right now to meet our 2014-15 target. One of the things that I think is key to the high school system design is making sure that there is equitable access to core programs so that students, regardless of their zip code, had an opportunity to get a quality education in any of our high schools. So during the last 3 years, there's been the implementation of a core program at all of our high schools. There is a minimum number of challenge and support classes that, for example, AP, IB, dual enrollment, dual credit, and then personalized learning around freshman academies, opportunities again for students to have programs that meet their needs. There's significant wraparound services that we have, Step Up, SEI, Sun Schools, there's AVID, Gear Up, so significant support for students so they can meet their goals of graduating. A goal as part of the core program was also personalization. And so when we really say things like knowing every student by name, what does that look like in our schools? And so we've established a real focus on making sure that programs are personalized to meet the needs of our students. And then lastly, an increase in rigor and relevance. What does it look like in our schools with regard to career-related learning, AP, IB, challenge classes? Relevance and rigor should be across the board. It's not something that, again, should be an exclusive expectation. It's something that I would say is relative. Whether we're in a TAG program, an ELL, special ed, or general ed, there should be rigor and relevance in our schools and in our programs. So as we move forward, we're looking at what we will consider opportunities for adaptive change. One, certainly in the report, points out the need for our elementary and middle grade programs to provide engaging programs for our students and really focusing on skill building. Successfully graduating from high school is not something that happens just between the grades of 9 and 12. It's really a pre-K-12 endeavor, and that's something that we're focusing on right now with our work around alignment. Another area that we know is important, as I previously mentioned, is a focus on improving rigor, relevance, and then what we're saying is fairness and responsiveness in instruction. So what does culturally responsive instruction look like and assessment and interventions at the secondary level? And so currently we're having deeper conversations around what does it look like inside every classroom. We know that the most effective way that we're going to improve our graduation rate is through teacher effectiveness. We know that some of the things that are in place right now throughout this document with regard to expectations are working. And so there's going to be a continued focus on implementing much of the expectations and charges that we put into the original high school system design major goals. And then lastly, with the successful passage of the bond, we have a real opportunity to take a look at not only what does a 21st century building look like, but what should take place inside those buildings. And so this is an exciting time for us to re-examine the work we do within our schools, as well as producing what we know will be some extraordinary facilities.
All right. So our next steps. The next steps that are going to be taking place beginning next month in January of 2013 are the Chief Academic Officer is going to convene a new high school action team to move forward with a lot of the identifiers and indicators that are discussed at greater length in the full report. So that'll start. That'll be a variety of stakeholders from comprehensive high schools, from primary education in the alternative system, as well as throughout the city, our business partners, our parents, and our cultural communities. And secondly, we'll have ongoing updates. This is a status report, as both Rob and Tripp have said, and so one of the things that we will have is we will have a timeline as we move forward for updates on how we are doing with our metrics, looking at the ones that we are on track for, how do we move those forward and set new targets, what did we not set targets for that we're starting to look for and answer and respond and engage in this community dialogue, much like today. And thank you for the questions that we have received. And we look forward to having ongoing communication and dialogue around what are other areas of work that we need to examine, and we'll continue to do so in the future.
Okay.
All right.
Thank you very much for that overview. And now we want to turn to Andrew Dyke from EcoNorthwest. As Karina mentioned, back in 2007, Portland Public Schools initiated the first cohort graduation rate study in Oregon, and it was the first time when, for the school district and for the larger community, it opened our eyes to how were we serving students. PPS has continued to do additional research, and this year partnered with EcoNorthwest to do a comparative study of Portland's high school completion outcomes compared to the rest of the state based on demographic factors. And so Andrew's going to tell us about that.
Yeah, thank you, Rob. And so what I want to do with the next 10 to 15 minutes really is give you a summary of the research we did for PPS at their request. And the idea was to do sort of a comparative analysis, look not just within PPS at high school outcomes, but compare those outcomes to the rest of Oregon. This is not comparing Portland to other urban districts. It's not comparing Oregon to the rest of the country. Everybody across the nation has work to do, but it's really to think about where is PPS doing well, given the public K-12 system in Oregon, where is it maybe doing not so well. Just as Tripp mentioned, all of the data that I'm going to talk about is reflective of outcomes for a single cohort of students, those that entered 9th grade in 2007, who would have graduated on time with a regular diploma in 2011. So all of these data reflect those outcomes. And just to give you a high-level overview, some of these numbers you will have seen, but I think some other numbers that aren't as well known. First of all, the 4-year on-time graduation rate, which is what most people will focus on. As was mentioned in the most recent data, PPS had a 62% graduation rate compared to 68% for the rest of the state. So PPS is falling behind there. Everybody has work to do to get that to that aspirational goal of 100%. But I want to look a little more broadly and think about additional high school completions as well. And so this next set of bars looks at the share of students who either received a regular diploma within 4 years or received some other kind of completion credential, whether it's a GED, a modified diploma, etc. And here we see Portland and the rest of the state looking pretty similar. 73% of Portland students had some kind of high school completion compared to 74% for the rest of the state. And then finally, to broaden the definition even further to what I'll characterize as sort of a measure of completion and system engagement, Portland actually does a little bit better than the state average. 84% of the cohort had either finished high school in some form or was enrolled for a 5th year in the hopes of completing in the next year. That's compared to the 82% for the rest of the state. And so between those two extremes, on the one end we see relatively few on-time graduations, but in terms of keeping students engaged in the system, Portland looking a little bit better. And I want to peel back those numbers and think about how are students different, because the natural question is, well, is it something about the students Portland is serving? Do they look different? Do they face more barriers than students in the rest of the state? And does that explain the difference in graduation rates? And the short answer is yes, students in Portland on average tend to come from subpopulations that historically have faced more barriers to graduation, but for the most part the differences are not huge. And just to walk through the categories quickly, Portland has slightly more economically disadvantaged students than the rest of the state. The most striking difference, Portland has significantly more non-white students than the rest of the state. But other differences are also relatively minor, slightly more special education students, slightly more students who are identified as limited English proficiency. So the student body that Portland's serving is a little bit different, and I think would be characterized as more challenging to serve, but not by huge margins. And so that's sort of the demographic profile. And with the next slide, I want to take a look at another dimension that I think districts can think about having more impact over. While districts have to accept sort of the demographic profile of the students they're serving, the way students move through the system is much more subject to policy decisions and so on. And so what this slide does is look at the mobility patterns, the paths through high school that students take. And the first couple of categories are what I think most people would consider traditional paths through high school. The dark blue bar shows you the share of students who start in a school in 9th grade and end up their high school career in that same school. So they may drop out, they may graduate, but they don't change schools. And here's where we see a big difference. Portland has a smaller share of students in this no mobility category than the rest of the state, 63% compared to 71%. The next category, light blue bars, is another fairly common path through high school, as people would recognize it. Whether it's Portland or across the rest of the state, about 1 in 10 students will move from a regular high school to another regular high school. And by regular high school, think sort of the traditional comprehensive high schools, your Cleveland, your Madisons, your Grants. The next few categories I think would be seen as they're not uncommon, but they're less typical in most people's minds. Students moving from a regular comprehensive high school to a non-regular but accountable program, fairly similar proportions of those transitions across the state. And these are students who start in the regular high school but move for one reason or another to a program that is accountable under state accountability rules for the graduation outcomes, but is not the comprehensive high school, so Alliance High School, Trillium, and so on. Next category, and here's where we see, I think, proportionately a big difference between PPS and the rest of the state, students moving from a regular high school to non-regular, non-accountable program. These are programs that the state does not hold directly accountable for high school outcomes, but students nonetheless flow through these programs. Many of the community-based programs in Portland would fall into this category, as well as some other programs. And the next category, partly a result of geography, students who drop into the public K-12 system after 9th grade. These may be students from another state, say think Vancouver, maybe students transferring from private school, homeschool settings into the public K-12 system. Here again, we see Portland with a relatively large share of these students. And then the final category, other, 6% in Portland, 4% in the rest of the state. These are students who change schools during high school but don't really touch the regular comprehensive high school system to a significant degree. They start in a non-regular program and end in some other non-regular program. So I think that presents a very different picture for Portland relative to the rest of the state. Do the differences matter? By and large, the answer is yes. I'm going to show outcomes, the same outcomes that we looked at before, regular diploma, other completion, continuing enrollment, and the balance of people is high school dropouts. Just focus on the top couple of bars for a second. These are the same numbers that I presented in the first slide. Comparing Portland to the rest of the state, you'd read the rest of the bars the same way. Portland with relatively low regular diploma receipt. When we look out to that broadest measure of completion and engagement, Portland looking a little bit better than the state average. While we do see performance differences across the different subpopulations, say white students, whether it's Portland or the rest of the state, they tend to graduate at higher rates. Nonetheless, Portland white students have slightly lower graduation rates and overall slightly higher engagement completion rates than the rest of the state. And we see a similar pattern in different places for most of the rest of the subcategories. And I want to flip to that other dimension of student characteristics, mobility, and here's where I think we see more important and potentially more actionable differences in outcomes. The top category, the no mobility category, recall that Portland had relatively few of these students, but for students who do stay in the same school that they start in, Portland outcomes in terms of graduation are equivalent to the rest of the state. Overall completion still a little bit better. As we move down the list from more typical, more stable transitions to probably less typical, less stable, we see Portland outcomes looking a little bit worse in terms of graduation as we move down the chart, and a little bit worse in total completion, although for most categories, except for the bottom, total completion and engagement still looks better in Portland than compared to the rest of the state. So that's sort of one-dimensional looks at these differences. A key piece of our analysis was a multivariate regression analysis, which is a lot of jargon, but basically what we're doing is looking at everything we know about students in this cohort, whether it's their demographics, their mobility patterns when they arrive in the state, in their home district, and we develop a statistical profile for each student and estimate the likelihood that they will graduate with a regular diploma, that they will complete or continue on in enrollment. For all of Portland and for the rest of the state, we aggregate all of those profiles and come up with an expected graduation rate, expected completion rate, and so on, and we compare what actually happened to that prediction. So just to quickly walk through this table, on the left two columns, we see the numbers that I've been repeating in a couple of different formats throughout, actual graduation outcomes. The third column, PPS adjusted, shows you what we would predict based on what we know about students, and a key thing to look at here is that the PPS adjusted graduation rate is a little bit lower than the statewide average. That reflects the additional changes in demographics and different challenges that PPS students face, but it's not as low as the actual outcome. And so we would say that in this metric, PPS is underperforming by about 4 percentage points. At the other end of the spectrum, students are completing or continuing. By the same measure, Portland is overperforming, or not overperforming, but performing better than expected by about 2 percentage points. What do we conclude from all of this? what I just showed you, after we control for student characteristics, the on-time graduation rate is short of predictions by a few percentage points, even after we account for what we know about students that this district is serving. Those broader measures of high school completion suggest performance that's as good or in some cases better than the state average. This suggests that there may be some actionable levers that the district could push to help better match students to attain those better outcomes and improve that graduation rate at the bottom. And finally, additional modeling along these same lines can help identify where historical referral patterns may have been inefficient, where outcomes look relatively good for certain subpopulations and where they don't look good. And the full report contains a very brief analysis that presents a couple of student profiles within PPS and across the rest of the state and looks at how Portland performance compares to those. Modeling of this sort can help the district understand where things are working and what levers might be pushed to improve the system in the future. So that's the conclusion. I just want to leave you with one more slide, and this is just sort of a back of the envelope what-if calculation. We saw that overall Portland does a good job keeping students engaged in some form in the system. And one question we could ask is, well, what if we took all of the students that, statistically speaking, look like high school graduates? Based on what we know, we think they have a high likelihood of receiving a regular diploma, but who actually receive a GED or take 5 years to graduate and so on. And so for this exercise, we identified all students who had at least a 75% chance of receiving a regular diploma and who received a GED or otherwise were still enrolled after 4 years, and said, well, what if they had all received a diploma in 4 years? What would that do to the graduation rate? And the answer is that Portland's graduation rate would have increased by 8 percentage points to 70%, exceeding the statewide average. Clearly, it's not as easy as that. There's no simple button we can push to do that, but it does suggest that there is room for improving the system and maybe some low-hanging fruit in terms of improving programs.
Great.
Okay. Thank you very much, Andrew. A couple of quick follow-up questions to your data and to the overall presentation. Looking at the 8% that you've just identified, students who looked statistically like four-year diploma graduates but didn't attain a four-year diploma, stayed in the system either at a regular comprehensive or focus school or in a CBO. What does that say for our school district going forward? How do we go about picking that low-hanging fruit?
Yeah, well, I think on the one hand, again, I mentioned the modeling, and one can repeat this kind of modeling for different subpopulations, and it's worth drilling down on populations of interest to look at where, what schools those high probability graduates are at, whether it's the CBO or the regular school, and identifying those groups of students. And then there's more work to be done in terms of what happened to them and sort of a disaggregation and looking at what was sort of the transition mobility pattern from one school to the next. Were there points at which the district or school counselors could have advised in a different direction to better match students with their outcomes? I'd say, obviously there are no easy answers to that, but a deeper look at the data can help to get at that and understand where things are working and where things are working less well.
I guess another question I would have, well, can you maybe share with us what the regression analysis highlighted in terms of student types that Portland was serving relatively well and other students that the district is not serving as well compared to the rest of the state? Yeah, so one of the places where we saw things working less well specifically, and I think one of the earlier slides kind of suggested this, was the special education population, where we see a much higher than predicted rate of sort of that broader completion category, which includes modified diplomas, lower on-time graduation rate. At the same time, for some subpopulations of white students, which are a majority of students, but not by a huge amount, and a lot of attention given to them, the district is either not very far below predictions or in some cases a little bit above predictions, depending on whether we're looking at economically disadvantaged students or not, and so on. So it's sort of a mixed bag, but we also saw for those non-mobile students outcomes looking at least as good as the state. So something seems to be working for that subpopulation. Okay. And I guess turning to Tripp and Karina, does the data suggest to you as educators, a need for more culturally responsive instruction, support for special needs students? What jumps out at you?
Well, I know that when we talk about the 8% that look like students in our schools that could have completed a 4-year diploma, I think that is a conversation that really is about support programs inside our schools, support teams that all of our high schools now have, where we have opportunities to know our students well, know their needs, and try and see if we can't match them to a program within our neighborhood comprehensive. If it doesn't fit their needs, if we can't find a program within the school that fits their needs, then I think we have a conversation with our external partners that we need, in essence, we need to do a better job of matching students to the right program.
Right. So one of the things that the report highlights is when we talk about community-based alternative schools, in Portland Public contracts with 14 currently, which is down from 19 2 years ago. And so when we went through the RFP process for alternative schools in 2010, 2011, we narrowed that looking at, as Andrew suggested, the state accountability is different for community-based alternatives. However, Portland Public Schools certainly has our accountability in every contract that we have with community-based alternative schools. So as we look to the data and look more closely at the data, as we are as an entire system all the time, one of the things we realize is how do we create a continuum that really serves all students so we don't let any of our students drop out or become disconnected. And when they do feel like there is not an appropriate school fit, how do we find a school fit that best meets the family's needs and the students' needs? One of the things that is articulated in the report is that our community-based alternative schools are designed to serve students that are off track. And so when we look at our milestones of our on track to graduate in 10th grade, having completed 6 credits in their freshman year, and looking at those students, I think what's happening as Tripp just said, in all of the comprehensive schools is we are doing a better job and a really focused effort at making sure that we know who is struggling and what they're struggling with and how do we connect with them during their freshman year. I think there's a lot of intention as students transition to high school throughout the district. And so having those conversations with families of students during their freshman year, and when neighborhood high school is not a fit for what academic or behavior or learning needs are different, what is the best fit? And so in the education options department, and on our website is a whole list of school choice. Part of what you will see is that alternative schools in our district that Portland Public Schools contracts with primarily serve students who are 17 and a half years old or older and more than 2 years behind academically. So 17 and a half with 7 credits is what the study has talked about. And so our job is to how do we help every student with skill development and with academic progress. And I think we have that in a variety of ways. The other thing that we have at Portland Public Schools that has really done a phenomenal job, and I think we'll continue to see, I look forward to looking at the data as time moves forward, is looking at our reconnection services. So we have a reconnection center at Benson High School that works with students who have been disengaged and out of school 6 weeks or longer. And so really asking our students to come back, doing specific individual outreach with individual families to say, can you come back and can we reconnect you to your neighborhood school? Or what is the best fit given the needs of the student? And so I think one of the things that this report really articulates is the continuum of a conversation between our comprehensive high schools, our focus high schools, our charter. We have 2 charter schools that include high school grades, and our community-based alternative schools. And so on that whole continuum, how do we do a better job of staying connected to each and every one of our high school students throughout the district?
Thank you, Karina. We received an email exactly on this question. My daughter goes to Leap High School. I've always been a strong supporter of public schools and still am, but for kids with special needs, middle and high schools don't work for everyone.
Right.
So going forward, how will Portland Public Schools facilitate the dialogue between the traditional comprehensive focused schools, community-based alternatives, charter schools. What ways do we work together as a system now between those different components? And are there ways that we can improve that collaboration and coordination?
Well, I'll jump in first, I think, and then let Karina speak to the work of our external partners. But I think right now, even when I say external partners in our organization, internal, it's really about taking a look at secondary education in Portland. And it's really a focus on meeting the needs of all of our students when they get to the secondary level. So what does that look like? What does it mean when we say we're trying to match the student to the right program? And so part of that is expanding, I think, the conversation with our partners that provide programs outside of our traditional neighborhood schools. And what does that look like when we sit down with them and say, we have a particular student that does not seem to be having the kind of success that he or she would like to have in our school. What kinds of programs do you have available out there that we think might provide them the kind of program that's going to keep them engaged with their academic work?
Right. And with LEAP in particular, LEAP and Trillium are two of our charter schools that serve high school age youth. One of the things that LEAP does is it has a focus on blended learning. So a lot of online options, which is also available throughout all of we're doing online learning throughout all of our high schools at this point, located in the high schools with mentor teachers. And I think part of what we look at is how do you create those small learning environments? And so that's more available and accessible in some of our options than in others. And so there are some students who do better in smaller settings, and we as an entire district are looking at how do we create small school feels and small school environments within cohorts or within classes, as our freshman class, as our sophomore class, again, throughout the district.
And I think also just on a technical, sort of a technical answer, if you will, is that I would encourage people to go onto our website. I would encourage people to talk to their counselor. I would encourage people to talk to principals in their schools with regard to the programs that not only are there within the building, but also what might be available throughout the district. And I think that's the first step, because again, if we keep going back to knowing every student by name, it's an opportunity to connect with some adult in the building that might be able to guide a family through the process of determining what is the best program for their son or daughter.
One of the areas which we often hear about personalization or providing an opportunity for a student to pursue his or her own individual interests is around career technical education. And we got a question from Michael who wrote in, what can and should Portland Public Schools do for students who are not college oriented to help them with their post-high school life?
Well, I mean, one thing that we have right now, and it's a school that is doing tremendous work, is Benson High School. So there is a choice school that we have, a focused option school that is really primarily focused only on career-related learning. So there is an opportunity to examine. I would say within all of our schools we have an increased examination of career-related learning. We have career coordinators in each of our high schools now. As of this year, it's an opportunity for students to go in and meet with an adult who can help connect them with possible internships, job shadowing. We have a great partnership with Portland Work Alliance, which does a wonderful career expo in the spring, where students can go over to the Coliseum and have an opportunity to meet directly with representatives from different companies. We have some great opportunities for students to do some job shadowing at places like Wyden and Kennedy, Nike. So there are opportunities that exist. It's taking a look at those opportunities within your school, and then also some of our external partners that are providing the kinds of opportunities around, again, internships, apprenticeships, and so on.
Right. And we also have at Alliance High School at Meek, we also have, and as well as at Benson, but at Alliance High School at Meek, there is, career-related learning tracks and paths around there's a robotics team, there's mechanics, And so there's a variety of things. Some of our community-based alternative schools, Open Meadow has a large career focus, post-secondary and career focus, as well as Portland Youth Builders, who part of their programs are around either construction or other mechanical learning, so hands-on learning. So there are different programs that have those specific focus.
And can I add one more thing? We have a terrific partnership with a number of businesses through our Pathways Advisory Council that was established by the superintendent and by Mayor Sam Adams. And as a result of that, there's been quite a bit of examination of current elective offerings to see what the balance is between certain pathways. And that's an ongoing conversation about how do we make sure that our elective programs are career related and have opportunities again for students to explore possible post-secondary career opportunities. So I don't want to miss out on acknowledging what I think is a tremendous amount of work and energy that council has put into this conversation.
Well, so related to that, dual credit, college credit, opportunities to prepare kids for their future. Chris writes, I'm shocked at the lack of availability of AP classes at Grant. Along those lines, are there fewer challenge opportunities for students at Grant or other high schools? And what are the range of dual credit options that are offered at the high school level?
Well, again, as earlier you mentioned, the rationale behind going through the high school system design process and some of the expectations. Part of it was equitable access to core programs. And when we look at the minimum requirement in our schools right now, we're looking at a minimum of 10 challenge type classes. So that could be IB, AP, and what we'll again continue to refer as dual enrollment, dual credit, which is where either a professor from PSU, for example, comes in and works with one of our teachers to provide a college-bearing course, or we have teachers that have a master's degree in the content area, being able to offer a course for college credit through an agreement with one of our local universities. And so in all of our schools right now, we have challenge classes. The difficulty that we currently have with regard to fiscal instability is the difficulty of balancing the number of courses that we can offer, so that, again, not only are we offering challenge courses, but we're also offering terrific elective classes and terrific support classes for kids that need those kinds of programs as well. And so specifically with Grant, there have been some choices to broaden, if you will, the spectrum of dual enrollment, dual credit classes there, which means, in this case, eliminating some of the AP program there. It's still a robust program. They've got challenge classes, and so again, I don't think there is a lack of challenge courses at Grant. I think they've just determined that there are ways in which we can offer dual enrollment, dual credit classes that are going to be equally as appealing to our students.
And the other thing I would say about dual enrollment, dual credit classes is I feel like when we look at our obligation to serve all students, the entry point for students of color into AP classes has been limited with regard to specific communities, and there are outreach efforts to do a better job of that with our Latino community, our African American community, our Native American community. And I believe that dual credit programs are, in some respects, more widely accepted by more diverse students. And so I think as far as how we get encouraging and inviting all students, regardless of your high school, regardless of your race, to engage in that conversation about post-secondary and a variety of options after high school. I think dual credit is one piece of that menu that's very important. And I think unlike an AP class where you have to take a test and score a 4 or a 5 most often to get college credit for it, that sense of that riskiness and that sense of just an ability or a higher level perhaps of confidence for a larger range of students to feel that they would have the opportunity to be successful is one of the things that I think is really positive about our enhancing our dual credit classes throughout our district.
And one of the key components of the high school system design was the change of Jefferson High School to a middle college program based on a model that's been successful nationwide in closing the achievement gap in other school districts, better serving students of color, better providing access to college opportunities. Can either of you say a little bit about how things are going at Jefferson, what we're seeing there?
Yeah, Jefferson is a terrific story right now in terms of the interest and our enrollment. I think we're projected in the document to go up to 500 students. If it gets to 600, it starts a conversation in terms of how to adjust, if you will, in terms of right now it's a focus school, it's not a comprehensive, but we're at about 450 students right now. We're seeing our on track to graduate percentages go up. We see more students who are coming into Jefferson, coming for the reasons about, again, getting college credit through PCC. We've got some exciting partnerships with our Oregon University system. So University of Oregon, Oregon State, Warner Pacific, a number of people are stepping up to be partners. If you're a family that is eligible for a Pell Grant and you go through this program, you're looking at a full tuition scholarship. So these opportunities are really exciting. It's an investment. It's a chance, again, to demonstrate that when you partner with the right people in the university system, good things can happen for our students. Students know coming into Jefferson right now that there's an expectation that you're going to get a minimum of 12 credits as a result of being in the program, but you could potentially get up to, I believe it's 45 credits, which is an extraordinary opportunity. Not only from the learning standpoint, but in this economic situation that we're in this country at this point, I mean, to get those kinds of college credits right now while you're in high school is a remarkable opportunity. And I think also with the governor's expectation around making sure that students graduate from high school, either get a 2-year or a 4-year, it's a step in the right direction. And Jefferson is demonstrating that today.
So let me ask you about another issue that was highlighted in the report, and that is grading. And that's something that the school board talked a bit about. In talking with parents about this report, we're hearing a lot about it as well. So tell us a little bit about how do grading practices in high school relate to the graduation rate, and what changes could we make to improve our grading practices in our high schools? And if we change grading, does that make grading less rigorous?
Well, this is a discussion that the principals have been having, and many of us have been having over the past year, and that's really the variability in grading in the district, the subjectivity of grading in the district, and what that does with regard to on track to graduate. So for example, if I'm a student that in my 9th grade year, I fail 1 or more classes, that may discourage me. We know the research says that when students fail 1 or more classes in the 9th grade year, they're already behind, and that may discourage me from moving forward. And so it's one of those markers that we look at to identify students that are at risk of failure. And so if in fact we see that there are some what I would call unsound grading practices taking place as we go through the data, that's an area that we need to get some focus on. It doesn't require more funding in order to get our eyes on what I'll call improvement of practice. And so right now there's a discussion that's taking place amongst, again, the high schools around when we look at a syllabus and we look at the the grading, the way in which a teacher is approaching grading, is it what we would consider sound? And if it isn't, it's an opportunity for a conversation around what best practice says sound grading should look like. And so does it mean that it's a diminishing of rigor? It really has nothing to do with rigor. It has all to do with what we're grading. So are we, for example, are we grading on proficiency? So it's a student's ability to demonstrate proficiency on content knowledge? Or are we entering in things like failure to do homework assignments? Does that really reflect on whether or not that student is proficient in a particular piece of that unit or program? So those are the kinds of things that we're taking a look at, because I really do think that that's something that we should be doing on an ongoing basis anyway. That's good practice in the world of teaching and learning.
And Karina, there is discussion in the report about instructional changes in community-based alternative programs. Do you want to say a little bit about that?
So one of the things that we are doing with professional development Title II dollars is we're working on integrating proficiency-based instruction and with the implementation of our Common Core state standards. And so just looking really intentionally at partnering with and looking deeply with our alternative schools and our charter schools around what is happening all around integration of Common Core state standards and the development of proficiency-based instruction and curriculum. And so that's something that's very present and continues to has momentum and will continue to do so, as it will kind of throughout the district, but particularly within the cohort of community-based alternative schools, we're looking at the same types of things as far as grading practices and fidelity, just from school to school, from classroom to classroom within each school and between schools.
And just for folks who may not know, Common Core state standards are?
Common Core state standards are nationally set standards that will be implemented nationally beginning next year, and they take into consideration reading, writing, math, science, the variety of what are the expectations for students throughout the curriculum. And so it's also another wonderful opportunity for us to align pre-K-12. So we're really looking, and it gives a wonderful opportunity, and we're having these conversations among feeder patterns. So when we look at high school system design, we're also looking at what are we doing in the middle schools, what are we doing in the primary grades around our Common Core state standards with specific to each content area, and how are we preparing students for the next grade, and for them to be proficient at every level, so that what the high schools receive are going to be more proficient, more high school ready students, to a greater number than we have today.
Well, I appreciate you raising that. So today's edition of the Oregonian included an editorial about the high school changes that we've made and spoke directly to this point. And just to quote from the editorial, it says, "The district is moving in the right direction. However, Portland has a long road ahead to push its on-time graduation rate to 70, 80, and 90+%. Based on the district's own data, the key to boosting this rate lies not just in high school itself, but in the earlier grades. Superintendent Carol Smith agrees with this approach and has championed it during her tenure." So can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the things that Portland Public Schools is doing to better prepare students in elementary and middle grades to enter high school, succeed in high school, and beyond?
So just a couple things that I'll answer first and then hand it to Tripp is, one of the things that Superintendent Smith has done a wonderful job of is working with all the superintendents within Multnomah County to look at so things coming from the state and then also from our county. So within Multnomah County, looking at our Cradle to Career initiative. So what part of what that entails is looking at our early education, our early intervention, and really looking at our students in a holistic manner and looking at our student families in a holistic manner. And so how do we support individual students, individual families, regardless of zip code, to be successful at every level. So that's something that's exciting that's happening within Multnomah County is the Cradle to Career Initiative, and I think that is kind of an umbrella for a lot of the work that we're doing. The other thing that I'll just mention is Governor Kitzhaber, both with education compacts, which set targets for our school districts, as well as the early learning centers and the focus on early learning. So I think one of the things that were happening is I think it's a very exciting time in education where there's a variety of initiatives from the national level, from Salem and the state level, and from our countywide level that really support our success. And so how we take it to the next level, we will continue the action team that we will get up and running soon, and as we continue to have conversations with high school principals, elementary school principals, with our community at large, and really looking at the whole continuum of our students as people and as family members from 0 to 8 and the early learning stuff, and at the other end of it to looking at post-secondary and career ready. And so I think it's just a really exciting time when things are really coming together that support our teachers who are working very hard to come together and bring our students up to where they need to be.
I would add that, Rob, we have this unique opportunity because we use a cluster structure, if you will, so that we have feeder schools that students in neighborhoods feed into our high school. And so the opportunity for alignment is real. It's right there in front of us, where if we can have deeper conversations around what I'll call academic and behavioral expectations of our students, beginning pre-K all the way to 8. If we look at, through studies like the one that EcoNorthwest did in terms of like, what is the mobility? So if we discover, for example, that in many of our feeder patterns, we have potentially students that are in that neighborhood, their entire K-8 career, pre-K-8 career, we know we have an opportunity to get them ready for that particular high school. So our work right now at leadership, for example, on a monthly basis, our high school principals are meeting with the feeder principals within that cluster to have conversations about what does it mean to be high school ready? What are some of the things that we can do to make sure that people at the pre-K-8 level recognize that the work that they're doing is truly preparing kids to be successful when they get to 9th grade. And so that's a conversation that is extraordinarily valuable. If we can align the system, I don't think there's any greater way in which you're going to see graduation rates change than by taking this kind of approach, where everybody is on the same page with regard to a common language around instruction, assessment, and intervention. You do that and you have people aligned pre-K-12, and I think you're going to see some dramatic results.
Okay, that's about all we have time for. So I want to thank Karina and Tripp and Andrew for joining us today and talking about what's happening in our high schools. I also want to thank everyone who wrote in with questions, and apologize we weren't able to get to all of them, but appreciate you taking the time to submit your questions. Great questions that we received. For anyone who wants to read the entire high school system design implementation report, it is available on the Portland Public Schools website. That's www.pps.net. And if you want to continue the conversation, want to encourage you to attend a high schools meeting on January 29th at Madison High School from 6 to 8 p.m. Please join the superintendent, school board members, and high school, middle school parents district-wide to continue talking about ways that we can accelerate progress in our high school system. So thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.